Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership's 6th Annual State of the Region. My name is Commissioner Martha Guzman-SOTR, and I am a Commissioner at the Public Utilities Commission. Thank you for letting me share a little bit about what I see happening at our state and at the local level in the Monterey Bay area. Okay, so I'm going to start off with just a quick state of what we see the current adoption rates are. And I'll preface one thing with some of these numbers that I'm going to share, which is these are the self-reported numbers by the internet service providers. So as of December last year, for Monterey County, we see these different attainment goals for adoption rates depending on speed. And as we know now with COVID, the main threshold that we should be shooting for, and that the governor has asked us to shoot for, which I'll talk about later, is the 100 megabits per second symmetrical speed, down and up. And unfortunately, as we can see, at least from a year ago, and I'm certainly hopeful that some of this has improved, but of course we are not there yet, the numbers in all three counties are pretty significantly low, and we're very far from meeting that goal. Even if we look at 25-3, there are huge, huge pockets of these regions that are continue to be unserved. And actually, even to say the speeds of 6 down, 1 up, which are really insufficient, are still missing significant parts of the population. So, as you can see, we're about half of the way there in the region, and we have a far, far way to go. But I'm hopeful today to talk to you about some ideas about how we can potentially get there. Okay, so this next level of slides gets into some detail about where each county has for their different set of providers. And if you see here for Monterey County, there's really 4 providers. And again, this is all self-reported data in terms of households that they're not served really, they're just depending on what your definition is, they have the availability potentially. But I'll talk about, here in Monterey County, for example, we've been partnering with many of you to try to find a solution for the community of San Gerardo. And when we engaged some of the cable companies, Comcast was probably the most responsive, but we also talked to Charter and Razo. And none of them are in the area, although in some of the maps that were reported from, again, this data that was reported to the FCC, this community was reported as served, which is obviously not the case. Anyhow, the point of showing you this is to show you that really, if you look at the number of households and the relevant speeds that we really need to function in today's society, there's only a handful of providers that meet that goal in Monterey County: AT&T, Charter, Comcast, and Razo. And only in certain areas. Okay, let's move on to San Benito. San Benito has even less what we call competition. Here you'll see AT&T is present, Charter, and a smaller degree Razo. And then moving on to Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz has a more robust set of providers, and we have some local ones like Cruzio. But there's also Sonic, Comcast, Charter, and of course AT&T. And the reason I'm giving you this kind of level of detail is to really gain the appreciation that when we think about other markets where there's competition, we think about a more robust set of players. And I think Santa Cruz County really is the only one that gets close. But for the most part, what we have in terms of our internet service providers across the state, which I'll show you here, is we have more of an oligopoly situation where really it's 3, and in some cases, depending on your county, maybe 4 or 5, but the major service providers across the state that are providing the level of service and internet service, and some could argue some not in all these areas, but there are only a few providers that are really serving the people of California. And as I showed you in the previous slides, the residents of your Tri-County area. And the reason I want to talk about this is just talking about kind of the two strategies that I want to hone in on with you today. Is one, we now have, with the change of administration, a new opportunity to really seek more contribution for these cable companies in particular, to really fill in these gaps. That's one strategy. The other strategy is to really build the backbone through more public infrastructure, to also fill in the needs in the areas that are unserved and potentially impact the affordability by bringing down the cost of actually servicing these areas through infrastructure, through public-private opportunity. So, talk about that role for local government and infrastructure, and also the role for federal and state government to provide more obligations from our current providers. And really, on the short term, the biggest need is to get more contribution from our local service providers. And those are really one of the more disturbing things that we've seen over the last few years, at least myself in this role, has been the amazing amount of data that we have now seen on the redlining that's happening, particularly in the service of cable companies. And certainly, having engaged more recently in Monterey County, and I can only assume for San Benito County, there's really what you would unfortunately find that is true when it happens with redlining, which is the findings have been across the state. Greenlining recently did a study, USC recently did a study, and there's many others. But if you're an older Californian, if you're a person with disability, if you're Black, if you're brown, or if you're a tribal person here in California, if you're a Native person, you're disproportionately impacted from service. That's what we're finding. So the notion that competition, again, doesn't really exist. We have more of an oligopoly situation, but competition alone cannot fix this problem. We need to couple it with some obligation, some regulation to fill in these gaps and to not allow for redlining. So, what are the ways to do there? Well, like I said, now that we have a new leadership at the federal level, one possible way, and at the state level too, is to really recognize the internet for what it is, a public utility, and therefore regulate it as such. And in the telecommunications realm, that means first and foremost recognizing that the internet is a telecommunications service that is a basic utility. And you'll hear many of these terms, Title I, Title II. Title II is really how we need to view the internet. And that will give us the ability to build on some of those real obligations that have existed for decades on the voice side of the service, and get to the place where finally we'll have an obligation to serve from some of these carriers. And from my perspective, the cable companies have currently the best infrastructure to make that happen. Okay. I also wanted to share, getting into the second strategy, is that the governor, in his executive order recently passed in August, directed many of the state agencies to work on this issue of broadband for all. And we were required to do many things, and one of the statewide mandates was really for all the state agencies to shoot for what is actually needed, 100 down, 100 up. And we're currently looking at all different models about how to accomplish this. And this is where we know that local governments will play a critical role in making this happen. We just recently opened a new rulemaking where we're asking the public, what is it that we can do to help local governments? We do, by the way, have had a longstanding program that was reauthorized a few years back, and we're seeking reauthorization of the California Advanced Service Fund, which has funded much infrastructure in the Tri-County areas. That program funding is going to be exhausted early next year. And so we need a reauthorization of that funding. However, there's other strategies that we need as well. And one of those strategies that we're learning from other states is how we optimize utility-owned infrastructure and how we partner with utilities, electricity utilities in particular, to build out in areas where it's optimal for electricity ratepayers and for areas of the state, particularly areas of the state that have unserved populations at the 100 down, 100 up speed. So I really do invite you all to participate in that proceeding. There's many other provisions in that proceeding that many of your colleagues here participating have encouraged us to look at. And so I could talk to you for a whole nother hour on that proceeding alone. But I want you to be aware of it, because particularly if there's an idea that you think the PUC has some realm of jurisdiction on, this is the time to bring it forward so that we can pursue it. And finally, I just want to say that there are other programs that also can help fill in the gaps today as we wait for a more comprehensive solution, really, be it deploying more public-private infrastructure or creating more obligations to the carriers. But I mentioned the California Advanced Service Fund already that helps build more infrastructure, hoping to see that extended again by the legislature this year. Another big program we implement is the California Teleconnect Fund. And that fund is largely focused on the K-12 system and helping subsidize those costs, which have been tremendous this year and will be next year. And we've been really creative in helping fund hotspots with that funding. But again, and some of that money also is available to nonprofits. So check that out. And then, as I mentioned, the broadband infrastructure deployment program that we're just kicking off. And finally, there's the Lifeline proceeding. The Lifeline proceeding is one of our oldest programs that has provided discount to voice customers from, the oldest program that we have, your old AT&T landline. Grandmother had a service, she got a discounted rate. Most of the time she was paying $20 a month. That's the Lifeline program. And it's evolved. It also predominantly now provides a cell phone service that's usually free and sometimes referred to as the Obama phone. That cell phone is the biggest part of the Lifeline program today. And what we're doing now in our recent rulemaking is expanding that to broadband and voice service subsidies. And I should note that the federal government, the FCC, does also have a Lifeline program for broadband. So I think the Lifeline program is really another piece of this puzzle to make sure that our communities and our community members have affordable broadband to the home. So there's a lot I've shared, and I really look forward to a dialogue and hoping that today's dialogue is just the beginning and that we continue to discuss and work on solutions, because there is a pathway here. It's not a silver bullet, but it is one that relies on a lot of collaboration and some new obligations. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the dialogue.